In today's video, I'll be talking about one of my bow hunting setups for this year, which is my Acadian Woods 3-piece tree stick. Now, I had actually gotten this bow back in the fall of 2018, so I've had it for several years now. I actually got it as a gift for doing some CAD work. So I got in touch with Tim, showed him some pictures of bows that he had made that I really liked the wood patterns on, but then basically left it up to him to put this thing all together. And the look, the aesthetic, and also the workmanship were just absolutely superb on this bow. It's a 64-inch bow, and I ordered it in 43 pounds at 28 inches, which means that my draw is somewhere in like the 45, 46 pound range. The only thing I would have changed about my initial order in hindsight was the grip. Instead of getting the more, I guess, ergonomic style of grip, I would have had him put in just like a normal target style medium height grip, which is ultimately what I ended up changing it to. One of the reasons also for going with a 64-inch bow as opposed to like a 60 or 62, which is a little bit more maneuverable in the woods environment, is just knowing that I have a little bit longer draw at 29.5, making sure that I'm reducing any chances that there's any kind of stack in those limbs. Now, I have hunted with this bow before for both deer and turkeys. In fact, I've shown this bow on videos before. And one of the challenges I've always had is when I've chosen to take it, it's always been on hunts where I have, let's say, one tag for the entire state. I have a doe coming in, and I'd be more than happy to shoot that doe from the traditional aspect. But if I would shoot, then there would go my entire tag for the state. Same thing if I had a smaller buck come through. All that scouting, I put it in the off season. I was always conflicted about, do I pass this deer or do I shoot it with traditional? Well, this year I'm hoping to solve that potential dilemma by just hunting in areas that I know have good deer densities and also give me a lot of tag opportunities. And then this spring I was so close on multiple opportunities to try and shoot a turkey with it. Just hunting in some state land not too far from my house, and I had a number of opportunities where I had toms within 10 yards and just wasn't quite able to pull it off. On one occasion I just had too many sets of eyes too close, I really couldn't move, and I had a hen sneak up in behind me before the toms came in, so I felt like I couldn't even really grab for my bow because she was so close. I had another opportunity where the bird was just walking in silent pine needles. He hooked around one way, and so I got up from my little position, swung around to be able to shoot, and then he silently worked back around through the pines, ended up on my weak side less than 10 yards away. Had I not heard him gobble right behind me, I would have still been in that position and probably could have shot him at about 8 yards. But it was probably the most exhilarating turkey hunting that I can remember. And some of the other reasons I haven't used this bow as much for hunting are for things that caused me to lack confidence, but I've since resolved. One of them is I always had a tendency with this bow to shoot to the right of where I was looking. It could be a really tight group that was offset 4 to 6 inches at 20 yards. I tried so many different things to try and resolve that issue. I tried modifying the grip. I tried changing my arrow setup. I tried adjusting the shelf. I tried elevated rests. I tried canning the bow. I tried a whole bunch of different things. Ultimately, what finally resolved it for me was, number one, adjusting the grip quite substantially. I reshaped it to where it now is very similar in shape and geometry to like an R-Core Katinos grip, a medium height grip, but also just center to center. I took a lot of material out of the left side of the grip, so I made it to where the center of the throat of the grip is right down the center line now. It was just slightly offset, and that seemed to make a big difference. Another thing that made a difference was my anchor. So if I had a lower anchor, which allowed me to get into a little bit easier alignment, then because the sight window is so short, oftentimes what I ended up realizing was with a lower anchor, the wood from the riser would be slightly covering up my dominant eye. And so some of my aiming and that information fill-in was happening for my non-dominant eye. And so that would occasionally cause me, I think, to shoot more to the right on certain days than others. So by going up to a higher anchor, that allowed me to have a full, nice open sight picture with that riser. And then lastly, with that higher anchor, I learned that you do need to cant ever so slightly. I mean, it kind of depends, right? The goal ultimately is to get your eye over the arrow. And I'd always kind of struggled with a higher anchor, partially for that reason, because the higher up you go, usually the further out it gets. So the anchor that I ended up settling on, which I'm now adopting to just about all of my hunting rigs for consistency, has been that my forward and back anchor is locked by my alignment. And then I just raise this hand up until this knuckle right here hits that hard bone-on-bone contact in my cheekbone. It's very similar to if you were laying your cheekbone on a rifle stock to get that nice cheek weld. It's a very similar feeling. Once I'm there, I just tilt ever so slightly to get my eye right over the arrow. And those things in combination have totally resolved that hitting right issue for me. And again, that's with tuned arrows. Initially, I was having problems regardless of what the arrow tune was. So if you're watching this video and you've had a similar struggle, look into those things. Look into how far is your side plate out. Look into your arrow diameter. Is your arrow offset? Does it need to go around the riser a lot? Is your anchor to the side of your face? Do you need to cant a little bit more? Is the sight window on your riser obscuring part of your vision? I'll say that after I've made these adjustments, which I did basically this winter, and put in hundreds and hundreds of shots refining that, I have so much more confidence shooting this bow than any other year prior. Now, for shooting style, from the videos that I have produced, you probably would think, oh, this guy's takes the target archer mentality as opposed to a bow hunting mentality. Well, I think there's an awful lot of similarities. Tom Clum kind of shows that in his solid archery mechanics course on the Push Archery Center of Knowledge, and all the Masters of the Barebow DVDs that have been produced decades ago. There's a lot of crossover, I think, between those styles, just like there's a lot of crossover between the compound side of things, looking at how target archers shoot and how bow hunters shoot. There's a lot of differences as well, just in terms of the setup, but a lot of the mechanics can be similar. That said, I do practice some of those quicker shots as well. But like I was telling one of my friends just the other day, there's a lot higher statistical probability that I'm going to need to come back to full draw on a deer and hold it full draw for 15-20 seconds before he finally gets in that shooting lane. I get him to stop and then execute a precision shot, as opposed to a scenario where I feel like getting off a quick snapshot is my only or best opportunity. But I also do have this much more simplified than, say, like the video I produced where I was shooting my field archery setup, because I want this to be a little bit more of a gap stinctive setup, and it's something I don't really tinker with. I spent a lot of trial and error figuring out an overall system that was going to work well for me in the woods and just be nice and reliable with very little thought input. And I think I've finally gotten to it. This is the setup that I hunted with for turkeys this spring. I did a lot of shooting in preparation for that hunt and kind of throughout, and I'm really happy with the overall byproduct. What I have is a really long, full-length Black Eagle Instinct arrow. It's 34 inches, and I played around with a couple different inserts. The two that I like the most are the Valkyrie system, and then also I have the Ethics system. Surprisingly, when I put the same amount of weight up front, they both tune the same, and out to 30 yards I can't really shoot the difference. So I kind of use them interchangeably depending on what I'm trying to do. But with these longer arrows and that higher anchor, I found that I get a point on of around 30 yards. And that means that for any normal hunting scenario where I'm shooting from, let's say, 5 to 18, it's a really easy sight picture. My mind sees that arrow. I'm not necessarily looking at the arrow. It's more of a, you could call it a gap stinctive or split vision type of a shooting, where my subconscious is aware of the arrow and it's aligning the left and right, and it's saying this sight picture looks right. Once that sight picture looks right, then I just focus on executing the clean shot. There's no crawl down the string, and this bow with that even tiller really likes that. Whenever I try to crawl down the string, it's not happy. So I'm shooting the bow the way that it likes to be shot in terms of the tiller. It's very quiet. It doesn't require a lot of thought input. And so from a hunting perspective, it's working out pretty well for me. By the way, just in case anybody is interested, these are 400 spines, full length, with about 220 to 225 grains up front. On the back end, some of my arrows just have the stock feathers from Black Eagle. I do have a couple of arrows fletched with trad vanes that I just took a Sharpie and put on some bars in case I'm dealing with wet weather. And I also did test, and these are objectively quieter in flight than the feathers are. So that's something I'm keeping in mind as well. And then I have some of these arrows fletched with natural wild turkey feathers from turkeys that I've shot, which should all still have the original oils and everything. But again, it's one of those trade-offs where the feathers, being really high cut, are going to have more forgiveness than does the trad vane. Also, if there's any kind of shelf contact on the shot, they're going to be ever so slightly more forgiving. However, the feathers are noisier. When you brush up against something, they're not nearly as durable, and they are a little bit louder in flight. And also, especially with the wild turkey feathers, you cannot see them in flight hardly at all, especially in a low light condition. Therefore, I'm shooting these with lighted nocks, just so from a hunting perspective, I'll be able to make a good decision about, yes, I hit the deer where I thought I hit the deer. And I'm filming all my hunts anyway, so they both work nice hand in hand together. The other thing that's really nice about shooting these micro diameter arrows with this setup is that the shelf is cut a little bit past center. And when I have the calf hair on here and a little toothpick underneath the calf hair, which is actually how the bow came delivered, this arrow is sitting just about perfect for in and out, just how you'd like it, to where it's ever so slightly just outside of center line. It's a nice, good, forgiving starting point to where I don't have to severely cant the bow in order to get my eye over the arrow. In fact, it's probably a good point to touch on the shelf overall. The way it's designed is so that it just has one little vertical contact point here on the vertical part of the shelf, and then the side plate again has that toothpick underneath the calf hair, so that you just have a tiny little bit of contact with the arrow on the shelf. In fact, if you look at Acadian Woods' channel, you'll be able to see actually how that shelf is created with the tools. Obviously it's very ugly looking right now because I had sanded a whole bunch of stuff down. I added in some wood epoxy, and then I ended up finding a darker wood epoxy which matches the natural wood color of the bow better. But ultimately all that rework that I did to the handle and the grip, trying to get it exactly how I liked it, took away some of the aesthetic for sure. It came with a nice beautiful stipple originally on that wood. But for me, how I'm able to shoot the bow and the confidence is a little bit more important. So at some point I may rework this even further to get it, prettier looking, but as for right now, I'm pretty happy with how it is. And then one other pretty key modification that I made to not actually the bow, but the quiver, is adding an aluminum stay in here. I can't 100% remember. I was looking for the receipt the other day. I believe this is a Thunderhorn quiver 6 arrow that I got from Three Rivers. But a challenge that I always had with that strap-on style was that it would tip a little bit, and if it got loose at all, as I would shoot, I would lose arrows. And the arrows would just kind of rattle down, or I was constantly having to shove them back up into the quiver hood. And I know that some quivers will come with that rigid component, like gun shy is an example of one. I'm sure there's others. But what I ended up doing is taking a piece of 3/4 inch by 1 inch thick aluminum from a hardware store and just bending this little shape into it, and then bolting it back in through that main bolt that connects the rubber piece to the quiver hood and the grippers. And that added a ton of rigidity there. And I also still have clearance for my hand, but now I don't lose arrows unless I'm going through really thick cover, and that still does happen where I'll be going through thick enough cover that I'll lose an arrow. But because these arrows have these bright crestings on them, they're usually pretty easy to find if I just retrace my steps. The string is from Triple T Archery. I gave him the specs of the bow, showed him a picture of the bow, said pick some colors that'll match this really well. I think it looks awesome. Originally this bow would come with a skinny string, so I ended up changing it over from the skinny string to a more typical string. I had him put in the rubber cat whiskers as well, which are color coded, and then I just on my own added in some aim steel. I took 1/4 inch, I believe, pieces of aim steel and then just served them onto the string. And then after shooting it for a little bit, it puffs up into this nice lightweight synthetic ball and adds to the silencing overall. And for micro tuning, you can adjust these up and down the string. Now the overall style of this bow likely falls into what you consider like a mild reflex-deflex longbow category. You don't have the string actually laying along the limbs, but you do have a little bit of curvature in there. Pros and cons of this kind of style, I kind of like them for hunting because they tend to be very quiet. They're not high performance, meaning for a certain grain per pound arrow, they're not fast. This bow, shooting at, again, 46 pounds, these arrows are mid 500 grain range. I'm getting just a little over 150 feet a second at my 29.5 inch draw, which isn't a barn burner by any means, but it also is very quiet. But mostly the arrow weight and the length and everything along with this, for me, played into the trajectory I was able to get in that point on distance, making it nice and easy to shoot at normal hunting distances. The other thing that I personally like about this reflex-deflex style of longbow is if I ever do see something in the field, like I notice, oh, the cresting on my arrow is normally right here, but now it's up here, meaning that my string got a little bit longer and my brace height shifted, then I can just go through and do the step-through method to de-string the bow, put a couple twists in it, string it back up right in the field. I don't need a stringer. Technically you should. I mean, it's always good practice to use a stringer, but I feel a lot more comfortable with doing it on a longbow style as compared to a recurve. And also when I'm going through heavy cover, Like if I was to bushwhack through this stuff, the limbs and sticks and weeds and everything don't get snagged up into this little crevice as much as they would with a recurve. When I walk around with a recurve in the woods, it seems like I'm always getting a blade of grass or something snagged in there, or a limb, and these don't get snagged up quite as bad. I know you can put other things in there, but it hasn't been that much of an issue that I've done anything apart from just, being careful as I'm walking. But overall, from a quality perspective, the aesthetic of this bow is absolutely awesome. The bow came in perfectly tailored exactly how I wanted it. The string is running right down the center, and when I shoot the bow, I'm able to get a nice perfect bullet hole paper tear at a 1/2 inch or even slightly less knock height with a 3 under. And when I shoot this thing in slow motion, you can see that vertical knock travel looks about as good as I can get it with my release quality. And I think that's also what helps play into the quietness of this overall setup. Is it the only bow that I'll continue to ever use for bow hunting? No, I don't think so. I'll keep using other ones as well, but this is definitely, I would say, one of two that I'll use for most of my hunting with traditional overall. And also, I'll throw in one more quick plug at the end here. The Push Archery Center of Knowledge, from Joel Turner Shot IQ to Tom Clum's Mechanics course. I booked some coaching with Alex Melnick. I got their new precision tuning course specific to bow hunting, which with this bow in particular helped me learn a lot, because there are things associated with tiller and finger pressure and grip torque that can all affect how easily you're able to get a perfect tune, and not just a tune that'll give you good bullet holes or clean bear shaft flight, but a tune that's also as quiet as it can be with the best knock travel that you can get. And there was definitely a ton of things that I learned watching that course. It's kind of expensive, but at least for me, I thought it was well worth it. So if you guys do have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I'm sure there's some things that I forgot to touch on or mention in this video, but thanks for watching.